it just shook the house. It was so loud. And then the captain of the ship started, drilling the horn or whatever they do with it over and over and over and over again, like panic-stricken.
We want to get a line on board the ship and get a means of escape for the crew if something did happen, and that's why we're setting up the line.
Our best effort is in salvage, and we will start salvage operations immediately.
On the night of November 18th, the ocean freighter Socrates fell victim to the stormy wind and sea of Lake Superior. For the next 6 days, the fate of her crew, the ship, and the delicate marine environment would captivate the people of the Northland. Her story has earned a chapter in the unique history of this maritime community, and this is a chronicle, a day-by-day account of a ship in distress. On Monday, November 18th, all eyes were on Geneva. It was the eve of the historic meeting between President Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. It was a dismal day in Duluth. A candlelight peace vigil at City Hall endured through snow, sleet, rain, and gusty winds, a foreshadowing of a vigil still to come. Out in Lake Superior, the ocean freighter Socrates, anchored in the sandy bottom off Park Point, began dragging her anchor. Her captain tried to get underway and stop the drift toward shore, but she was no match for the 50-mile-per-hour winds, and at 7:45, the Socrates, 584 feet of steel, ran aground. For the next few hours, she was pummeled by the hurricane wind in a sea now topping 15 feet. The ship was at the mercy of Lake Superior, a lake not known for its benevolence. The constant back-and-forth motion of the ship continued to put a tremendous strain on the hull. As midnight approached, so did the possibility that the ship would break up, literally come apart at the seams, and the 24-man Greek and Filipino crew were in danger. Unable to reach the ship in the shallow water and violent breakers, the Coast Guard made a decision.
Well, we're obviously concerned about the potential things that could happen to the ship. We want to get a line on board the ship and get a means of escape for the crew if something did happen, and that's why we're setting up the line.
I decided that it was necessary that we be ready for any contingency, and asked the group commander and to arrange for a breeches buoy or to get a line on the ship. Through a very stormy, heavy sea, broke the line once, managed to get it on the second time, and install a breeches buoy so that in case things started going badly for the ship, we could have gotten the crew off.
As the storm began to abate, the decision was made to leave the crew on board for the night. The wait would go on. At first light, preparations were made to disembark the crew. The first Coast Guard Zodiac lost its motor and returned for repair. But finally, shortly after 10 a.m., 14 hours after the Socrates ran aground, the first of the crew went over the side. Dressed in survival suits, the first 3 crewmen came ashore, cold, tired, and somewhat bewildered by a flurry of reporters' questions.
How do you feel now?
Fine now, fine.
Were you scared out there?
Yeah.
Scared, frightened? Are you nervous?
No, no.
After 6 crew members were safely ashore, the evacuation suddenly stopped. Just as suddenly, the sky cleared and the seas began to calm while 2 tugboats moved toward the Socrates. Lines were attached to the aft of the ship and the tugboats began to pull, first one way, then the other. But the sand held the Socrates firm and she didn't move an inch. The effort was aborted at 2:30 and the Coast Guard moved in to remove the remaining crew. The Socrates was now abandoned for the night. Then the Coast Guard began the job of trying to figure out what to do next.
The towing effort that was tried today shows that it's a major salvage effort, I believe. over the next few days, we will probably get a better handle on the length of time necessary, for the salvage. We might be looking at it for a while.
It is now Wednesday morning. The Socrates has been aground for more than 36 hours.
At this point, the Coast Guard is taking the steps to bring men and equipment into a standby position here in Duluth.
At 9 a.m., salvage experts and divers from the Coast Guard's North Atlantic Strike Team board the Socrates. They have flown from North Carolina to assist this operation. With them, officials from Durocher Dock and Dredge, a private firm from Michigan hired by the ship's owners, Heliotrope of Liberia, to help free the vessel. After examining the ship from stem to stern, the group gathered at the Coast Guard Marine Safety Office to meet with Commander Spurgeon. An hour later, their plan was announced.
Sometime tomorrow, we should have all the ballast that is on board removed, all the tugs that are available in the harbor, or as many tugs as necessary that are available in the harbor, will be placed a strain on it, and we'll attempt to pull it off the beach.
The ship's four-peak ballast tank had been damaged in the grounding. There were now two large holes, one big enough for a diver to swim through. That would have to be repaired. The Coast Guard also found the ship's thick fuel oil nearly frozen from the lack of heat. That would be left on board. The chances of environmental contamination were considered small, and it would take too much valuable time to pump the nearly solid fuel off the ship. The weather was predicted to hold until Friday, so crews would work throughout the night to prepare the ship for salvage. They would let their bets ride on the number 7, the 7 tugboats which would try to pull the ship into open water. In the meantime, the Socrates would spend this night, her third, captive on the sandy beach off Park Point. The weather on Thursday the 21st continued to hold, and it appeared this would be the day the Socrates would find its way to open water. But the salvage effort was bogged down by preliminaries. An intake valve needed to cool the ship's generators was blocked by sand and ice, making it difficult to clear. A dredge and tug were needed to secure the ship's anchors, but they found the going slow. And below the waterline, divers were having problems patching two large holes in the front ballast tank. Patches placed on the exterior of the ship were not watertight, and working in the narrow crawl space in the bowels of the ship was slow and difficult. So much for the pull at first light. In fact, the first visible sign of progress did not come until early afternoon, when water began spouting from the ballast tanks, but it was only a test to clear ice from the lines. At 2:30, the word was the big pull would come after dark, but at 4 o'clock, they changed their minds. There would be no attempt this day. For all their efforts, work crews just could not outrace Mother Nature.
Right now, because of deteriorating weather, it's safer for people not to be on board the vessel, so the operations are going to stop. We're totally at Mother Nature's whim to get it off. We work only with those things that we can control.
Once again, it was time to wait out the weather. The predicted storm turned out to be nothing but a short-lived squall. The wind and waves began to calm. In fact, the rise in the water level turned out to be a blessing.
We would hope that we would be ready to start pulling heavily before 4 o'clock, so we would hope to be able to start at 3 o'clock. The lake has helped take the list off, and the fact that we dropped ballast yesterday. Those two things are acting in combination to reduce the list.
At 9 a.m., salvage crews began boarding the Socrates, and at 1:30, the assembled tugboats began moving the ship slowly off Park Point as spectators strained to get a glimpse through the afternoon snow and fog. At 4:15, the ship's propeller began to turn, giving the effort a little extra horsepower, but it was not to be.
They were not making any progress. They had made tremendous progress up until that point but they just had not made any progress. The salvage experts told Commander Spurgeon they wanted to stop and that they were going to do several things during the night that would hopefully ensure the ship be off tomorrow.
Those preparations added a whole new dimension to the salvage effort, for under the halogen glow of the ship's lights, a lone shovel began to dig. If the ship wouldn't move off the sand, they would have to move the sand from beneath the ship. Tomorrow, they said, tomorrow we'll get it. Evening, then morning, the 5th day. The dredging continued throughout the night, and another shovel was brought in early on Saturday. The front ballast tank continued to be a problem. Friday's effort had floated the front of the ship. It was the rear that was bogged down in the sand, and salvage crews thought flooding the front tanks would help lift the rear off the beach. But the patches to the hull were still not watertight, and divers continued to work in the icy water inside the ship to make the needed repairs. As noon approached, the word was another pull early in the afternoon. But by early afternoon, the only tugboats in sight were those maneuvering the dredges. And finally, a decision was made to delay another big pull until Sunday morning.
In the morning, we'll ballast starting at first light. We will start attempting to pull it off using anchors and tugs.
As dredges and divers continued to work, the Socrates was preparing to spend her 6th night on Park Point. She had become a temporary landmark in the Twin Ports, drawing thousands to the beaches each day. The Socrates had found itself a foster parent, for during the previous week, the Twin Ports had all but adopted the ship and claimed her for her own.
I've not noticed any real large groups of people out here. There have been a lot of individuals and family groups out here, just kind of sharing a kind of a personal experience with this particular wreck.
It was one of those once-in-a-lifetime opportunities that the people of the Northland didn't want to miss.
It's not often you see an ocean vessel beached in Duluth, Minnesota, and it's just kind of unique in the middle of winter to see something like this.
The ghoulishness that surrounds fires or other natural disasters was absent from this event. The danger to the crew ended shortly after the saga began. It was simply a big boat, and it ran aground in the Twin Ports, and that made it the most popular tourist attraction in the Northland.
We've come down here before in some big storms, and I think people really like to see things like this happen. We don't like to see it for the ship, and we're really sad and hope it gets off okay, but if it's down here, we're going to take advantage of it and see the people, and we've got a lot of friends down here.
Thousands made the trek across the aerial lift bridge and down to the beach to get a glimpse of the stranded freighter. With or without proper clothing, the bitterly cold temperatures did not detract from what became the largest family picnic in Twin Ports history.
I think one of the most exciting things for me is to look back and try and all the people that are out here now in a kind of a subdued carnival atmosphere that's surrounding the wreck, and think back to 1905 when the Matappa storm occurred, and throughout that winter to see the people from the older pictures, to see the people going out to the wreck in their Sunday best and ice skating around it, and to see some of that more subdued excitement here.
The beach became a giant playground for children, and perhaps the most popular place in town to walk the dog. The Socrates was so popular, the flood of curiosity seekers became a giant headache for the police, the media, and Park Point residents. So on Wednesday, the Visitors and Convention Bureau christened the Socrates Shuttle, taking sightseers on hourly runs from Canal Park to the beach at 16th and Minnesota. The bus ran for 5 days, and it never made a trip without passengers. In fact, the longer the grounding went on, the more captivated the Twin Ports became. Those brave souls who waded through the on-again, off-again attempts to free the ship finally resorted to bonfires and marshmallows to keep warm. Others took a different approach. The Canal Park Inn gave the ship top billing on its marquee. The Canal Park Marine Museum began an exhibit detailing the day-by-day progress of the Socrates, or the lack thereof. And yes, there was even a place for the entrepreneur. By Saturday, some area merchants began hawking T-shirts, caps, and other Socrates memorabilia, of course at discount prices. There was even some down-home hospitality. The Park Point Community Club sent an invitation to the officers and the crew of the Socrates, informing them that they were now eligible, as Park Point residents, to join the organization. But the invitation was not received by the crew until Saturday. And as it turned out, the Socrates would pull up stakes before they could attend the next meeting. It is now Sunday morning, and bitter cold has moved into the twin ports. Bathed in the soft light of dawn, the Socrates appears suspended by the chilling mist of Lake Superior. For 6 days, she has been battered by strong winds, snow, and high seas. And for 6 days, she has stubbornly refused to budge from her resting place on Park Point. But now the dredging is complete. The holes in her hull have been patched, and her front ballast tank has been flooded. The salvers have done everything they could to prepare for this morning's effort. It was now time for brute horsepower. By 9:30, all the tugboats were in position. 6 lines were led away from the bow of the ship, and a 7th tug pulled alongside like a pilot fish, adding her own strength to the effort and shadowing the movements of the other boats. At 9:45, the 7 tugs pooled their power and gunned their engines. Lines grew tight and quivered, and black plumes of smoke rose in contrast to the morning mist. The tugboats moved the Socrates from side to side, hoping to drop the ship's hull into the 20-foot trenches that had been dug on both sides of the stranded freighter. But it was slow going. In the first hour, the Socrates crawled barely 60 feet along the bottom. 30,000 horsepower appeared not to be enough. At 10:30, a tugboat lost an engine, and the effort came to a temporary halt. It was the first and only casualty of the week-long struggle. By 11:45, the ship had moved a little over 100 feet. From time to time, the ship could be seen lurching forward, then coming to a halt. By noon, her progress could only be detected by time-lapse photography.
It was pretty serious on the bridge. Everybody was very professional. The salvers were working the tugs and were doing everything as planned.
And finally, at 12:46, 3 hours and a minute into the round, Park Point threw in the towel and surrendered the Socrates to the open water of Lake Superior.
Keep going. Yeah, that's it. He's free.
You know, I guess it's just the happiness that came along with knowing that he can go home. But there's some people on the bridge shaking hands and congratulating people for a good job and well done.
When we swung the bow out on Friday, then we knew we had it. It was then a question of how long it was going to take. I felt very confident when I called the district office yesterday evening before I went home. I told them that I thought it was going to come off today. I'm glad it came off. It makes me look good.
The Socrates, horns still blowing, moved out to open water. Even though she was now off the beach, there was still much work to be done. For except for the front 2 tanks, the ship had no ballast. She was not stable in the water. Once again at anchor a mile off the ship canal, the crew of the Socrates began checking the engine, the electrical system, and the ship's ballast system. They began flooding the remaining 10 ballast tanks to make the ship more seaworthy. Until then, the ship would remain in the lake. As members of the North Atlantic Strike Team came ashore, Commander Stanley Spurgeon was all smiles. As captain of the port, he was the man in charge throughout the 6-day ordeal.
That's everything we have intended to accomplish. Save the crew, save the ship, no environmental damage. We will investigate to determine cause. Now, everything that happens to a ship is not always the master's fault. To say that the master is at fault would be somewhat premature. So no, I wouldn't say that now at all.
And so the grounding of the Socrates had come to an end. But as the ship was guided into St. Louis Bay, questions remained about the series of events that led to Monday night's near disaster. But they were questions that would have to wait. For now, the Socrates, her crew, her salvers, and the Coast Guard were just happy to have her safely tied to the Port Authority Pier in St. Louis Bay.
From the owner's standpoint, perhaps he may want it out of here, but it's not going to leave here till it's safe. And if it has to stay here through the winter to make it safe, I would understand the owner's position, but that's not one of my deadlines.
That was the assessment as the Socrates prepared to move into St. Louis Bay. Now that the immediate concern of removing the ship from Park Point had been addressed and the ship was safely tied to the Port Authority Pier, it was time to figure out what happened, who, if anyone, was at fault, and how badly the ship was damaged by the grounding. Throughout the 6-day salvage effort, the Coast Guard carefully avoided assigning any blame for the mishap.
We look to make recommendations for corrective safety action so that there is something that would prevent something like this from reoccurring. Of course, you have to be practical. Sometimes it's not possible.
To that end, 2 Coast Guard inspectors boarded the Socrates early Monday morning to determine the ship's seaworthiness and what, if any, additional repairs were needed before the ship could depart. Investigators began interviewing the ship's officers and crew, but since there was no United States pilot on board when the vessel ran aground, there was little action that could be taken against the master or any other crew member whose actions might have constituted negligence. The Coast Guard was simply trying to find out what happened, not who was at fault, in an effort to keep another freighter from meeting the same fate as the Socrates. That investigation continues to this day. As for the Socrates, permanent repairs were made to her front ballast tank, and on Friday, December 6th, the Socrates finally sailed out of the Twin Ports, bound for Italy with a load of grain. Not since the Mataafa in 1905 had a ship run aground here in the Twin Ports. And not since 1975, when the Edmund Fitzgerald went down, had the fate of a ship and her crew so captivated the people of the Northland. For 6 nights and 6 days, the Coast Guard worked to save the crew and then the ship. For 6 nights and 6 days, we of the media called Park Point home, following a story that changed almost minute by minute. And for 6 nights and 6 days, you, the people of the Northland, watched with us, snapping tens of thousands of photographs, celluloid memories that 10 years from now, 50 years from now, will be taken from cardboard shirt boxes and dusty old photo albums, and you'll remember. You'll remember a November storm, and this place on Park Point, and a ship called Socrates. I'm John Gillespie.